Am I again? I
You are.
think.
You are.
Yeah, first time I think I've ever done back-to-back bios. So let me move over to my notes right now. We are going to do, as Josh mentioned earlier, we are going to do the third. This is the third Stone Temple Pilots album, and we've done the first two, which were Core and Purple. This is Tiny Music, songs from the Vatican Gift Shop by the Stone Temple Pilots. In the opener, you heard Tripping on a Hole in a Paper Heart. Tripping on a Hole in a Paper Heart, excuse me. And now you're going to hear Big Bang. Whew, I've been doing a lot of talking right there. And I had the last take too, so you're probably tired of my voice. Matt, what are the numbers for this one?
The numbers for Tiny Music, songs from the Vatican Gift Shop by Stone Temple Pilots comes in at number 327 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 31 in 1996, number 1,774 of all time. It is the Stone Temple Pilots' third highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, behind 1992's Core and 1994's Purple, both albums that we covered in previous episodes this season. Tiny Music did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Stone Temple Pilots are ranked number 328 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Gotcha. Well, if you want to hear the early bio of Stone Temple Pilots, we did not do it when Core came on. That was more of a bonus one. So you're going to want to go back a little bit earlier this season to when we covered Purple, because that is when the beginning bios here. I'm not going to revisit that bio too much outside of the very basics. The very basics in this case are who are Stone Temple Pilots, and they are a rock band from San Diego, California, formed in the year 1989. The original group was Scott Weiland on vocals, the DeLeo brothers, Dean and Robert on guitar and bass along the way, and drummer Eric Kretz. And that is actually the lineup all the way until 2013, when Scott Weiland is fired. And I think famously Chester Bennington from Linkin Park came in. They were originally Mighty Joe Young after the movie character, but before they signed to Atlantic Records, they had changed their name to Stone Temple Pilots. If I remember correctly, and I forget who did the bio the last time we did it, but STP, they saw the sticker, right? And they just decided to come up with a moniker based around STP. So it was kind of like a nonsense moniker. Did I get that correct?
That sounds right. I don't remember if I covered them or Josh did, but yeah. I think
You did,
right.
I think, Matt. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe that's what the story was, that they saw that and went from there.
Nope.
Okay.
I did. Jeez.
Well, Josh, I
way to
I'll
remember
look it
your
up.
bios, Josh.
It's back on episode 33, by the way, so check that out.
Yep.
This season.
I'll lock that up. But so let's go to like where they were at in between this album. So this one was released on March 26, 1996, after touring off of the back of Purple and becoming a pretty damn huge band during this time. They took a brief hiatus throughout most of 1995. Before coming together to record this album in St. Ynez, Ynez, I believe that's the pronunciation, Ynez, California, where all of them were living at the time as well. Interestingly enough, and I don't know, are you guys familiar with Brendan O'Brien, guys?
No.
Yes, I am, but I don't remember why. He's a producer?
Yes. So completely unrelated to this, there's a YouTube channel called Trash Theory, which I would definitely recommend. So I'll co-sign that, that kind of like does sketches of different albums or artists. Really good bio, kind of ties stuff together. Does a little bit of what we do on CTS, but probably better by quite a bit than what we do. In terms of it has a lot of visuals.
I don't think that's possible.
I'm going to co-sign the guy. I'm going to give him that. But they actually had something up about Brendan O'Brien, who you're correct, Matt. He's a record producer, and mixer, and engineer. He did like tons of grunge, but he also did like Dylan, Springsteen, AC/DC, all these different groups. But he also was famous for being like the go-to producer for nu metal. So he did albums for like Limp Bizkit, Papa Roach, Korn, etc. He also was the vice president of Epic Records. So that's all off the top of my head, but interesting guy. So when I saw that he produced this album, I was like, this guy's starting to like come into the CTS world here and will be present for a long time. So this album is famous for being where the Stone Temple Pilots said, really at the end of the day, like our influences are much more rock, psychedelic rock, and glam rock, and maybe a little bit less grunge. And they decided to make a conscious effort to lean into those sounds as well as some others. And also Scott Weiland, I don't know if you noticed, guys, I'm sure you did. He went for a much higher and raspier tone by design for how he sang on this album. They also decided to bring in more instrumentation than just the four-piece they were. So they were bringing in trumpets, organs, and vibraphones for this album. This album also was very mixed in terms of how the critics received it. Some loved it, some did not like it. It had three singles: Big Bang Baby, Trippin' on a Hole in a Paper Heart, and Lady Picture Show. All of them had music videos that were in steady rotation on MTV and on alternative rock radio. And the band toured and promoted this album throughout 1996 and all of 1997. But this was also around the time where Scott Weiland's drug issues went from being problematic to like very problematic. So that is a little bit of the legacy as well. This album was also clouded by Scott Weiland's challenges in early 1995 when they were starting the recording. Scott Weiland was arrested for heroin and cocaine possession and got 1 year's probation. They actually ended up scrapping the 2 weeks of material they did before that. Scott Weiland was also pursuing a side band at this time called the Magnificent Bastards. And they were going to release, ready for this, Matt, a John Lennon tribute album, which I thought was kind of interesting. Then the rest of the band decided that they were going to do their own side project. So they did a side project with everybody but Scott Weiland. So you can see already that there's some challenges going on right there. In the fall of 1995, they reconvened to record this album. At that point, the DeLeo brothers were trying to figure out which songs were going to be on this album and which ones were going to be for their side project called Talk Show. They had 30 songs, and they sat in a room one night, and how it was described by Dean DeLeo, he said he and his brother had 30 songs, and they just went to a room one night, went down the list, and just marked every song Scott or Dave. Dave was the name of the lead singer of Talk Show, and Scott was obviously Scott Weiland. And he said basically any of these songs could have been on either of the albums. So if you like one of the songs on one of the albums, know that it just as much could have been on the other one. As they were touring, Scott Weiland was entertaining and eventually would go into rehab as well. So that unfortunately becomes the theme of what STP is for a lot of the rest of their time, sort of periods of lucidity mixed with non-lucidity for Scott Weiland. They have a copious list of genres of music that they said influenced them on this. I won't go into them because I'm curious to see how many of them that they mentioned you guys picked up on, if at all. The album cover, since we're talking album covers this week, was designed to resemble a 70s style LP cover, and it features a woman in a swimsuit standing in a pool with a crocodile in it. And the altar in the background was a last-minute addition that Scott wanted to put in. And since it actually existed in his house, they just went there to shoot the whole cover. So that's actually Scott Weiland's house is featured in it as well. The album, like I said, it was, some people thought it was their best work. Some people thought it was not as good as their previous work. It was definitely the most popular amongst musicians. This was the one that started to get them their own credibility amongst musicians and so-called serious music fans, as opposed to their first two. So yeah, it's an interesting album because it didn't sell as well as the first two. Still sold pretty well. And I am super curious where you guys stand on this album. I do know this album very well. I have, in particular, a good friend who loves this album, and it was a pretty consistent play at the time that it came out and even later with that friend. And I myself found myself listening to it quite a bit. But I have the third take. Josh, you get the first take here.
Yeah, I had not heard this album before. I think I've definitely heard some of the singles off of it, and I have real mixed feelings about this album. The first thing that really jumped out at me is I don't like the production on this album. I think it was a conscious choice probably to sound different from their previous albums, but it feels like everything is really flattened out and like tinny and doesn't sound very good. Now knowing that Scott Weiland changed his voice intentionally, I didn't like that as well. I think maybe if I gave it some more listens, it probably works in the context of this album, but I think he has a pretty strong voice, and I liked his voice on the previous albums a lot, so that kind of threw me for a loop for a bit. It's clear that they were trying, like you said, for a retro sound. I feel like that, that is obvious throughout when you're listening. I'm not sure if I totally like that idea. I think some of the song, I think despite my kind of misgivings about that, I think a lot of the songs do work really well. I think the talent and the songwriting kind of rise above of those feelings that I have, especially on like the songs that John picked for the montage and the opener. I also really liked Lady Picture Show a lot, Art Schoolgirl, Seven Caged Tigers at the end I really liked as well. And I think they're also, not only that retro sound, kind of that 60s rock sound, but I also got some kind of like glam vibes on this too. There's just some really good hooks, I think, ultimately on some of these songs, and that make me tap my toes and kind of make me enjoy the songs. I wasn't familiar with a lot of these, or I'd forgotten the ones that that did sound familiar, and so that's the hallmark of a good song for me, is if it can pull me in, even like knowing my overall feelings of the album. And so I think overall it kind of regresses to the mean for me, and I think it's a good album, but I do have some issues with it. Those are kind of my initial thoughts on this one. It did feel like it seems like they continue to make music. Is Scott Weiland kicked out after this album, or if they continue to work with him? Or
no, they do number 4 after this one, okay, which comes later in the 90s, and they do some more work. There's another album after that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know. It's like, we were really high on Core and Purple, I think, and I was higher on those albums than this album, but that's where I'm at right now with this one. So it's kind of a thumbs in the middle, thumbs up sort of.
Well, I own this record. I had the first 3 STP records, so I knew it pretty well. I actually didn't know this might have been a record where I didn't listen, I don't know, the full way through a bunch of times, but like the last couple of songs kind of were a little like Ride the Cliche, Daisy, and Seven Caged Tigers were songs that I was like, okay, I kind of remember them, but not as much as the other ones. So maybe I stopped listening. But I'm not sure why. I do like this record. I don't. Josh, I kind of see what you're saying about the production, but I don't really have an issue with any of that. I kind of view this as an album as an extension of what they started doing with Purple, mm-hmm. in that they were branching out, right, trying different sounds, not just doing, going from their straight, pretty much grunge record of Core into kind of exploring different avenues, and doing a song like Adhesive, right, or Lady Picture Show, which is a standout for me. That's probably the song of this record that I knew that like kind of shone the brightest, I think, this week. I just was like, man, that's just a great chorus, great. I like the verses. It's just a really well done song, and that's the one that kind of stuck with me more this week. But it's got great the singles, Tripping on a Hole and A Paper Heart. I've always loved that song. That's a great, and looks like it's the one song on the album that the drummer wrote. I'm looking at here, which is kind of interesting, because I was like, damn, that's just such a great, upbeat rockin' song. It's got a great guitar solo in the middle of it, and a great bridge into the chorus. So I think that's a great song. I think Big Bang Baby was the first major single from this, and I do remember that video. There's definitely glam, like just touch points of all the bands and stuff. It's like a very 70s. This is like a lot of Rolling Stones. It's a lot of Led Zeppelin. It's a lot of like, there's some Bowie in here. There's some like Sweet and like, the what is it, the
T-Rex,
T-Rex right, stuff. And I remember Big Bang Baby was they got crap for that because they basically ripped off Jumpin' Jack Flash as a crash 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 as Big Bang, so so I know, and I was looking at the ratings here, and apparently the initial review from Pitchfork was a 0.8 out of 10. And I read the review and I was like, holy crap, it's the most brutal review I've ever read. Basically, at the end of the review, the guy tells Weiland to just literally just go inject enough heroin to kill himself and put him out of his misery. And I was like, holy crap, dude! Like that's not a good thing to put in any review, but especially that this one particularly doesn't age well. So,
and then 15 years later, they write like a retcon thing, like I was young and like the internet's a difficult place.
It's just I don't know. There's something about that, like, and it was there was more to it than that. It was just like there's sheer anger at him, and like there's nothing. And I like Stone Temple Pilots, and there's nothing valid at all in this. It's like, shut up. I don't know, like people that are just brutally negative in reviews.
Remember, a lot of those guys were like 19 years old living in their mother's basement when they were writing those things, which I think is always something that's important to remember about the Pitchfork of that era, that it's just, like, these were literally 19-year-old untrained critics.
It makes you realize, like, there's an art to being a critic, right? And we're certainly amateurs, and sometimes I struggle a lot. Like, I kind of like the book. Can I say exactly why? Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. Sometimes I feel like I have a lot to say, sometimes I don't. So, and you want to be thoughtful about your criticism, because certainly people have put a lot of time and energy. There's, regardless of how much you like or dislike a record, there's talent that goes into this. It's hard to put an album together. It's hard to write a song, and for a lot of people, it's really personal, and it's just interesting that everybody has different takes and stuff. But it's a little bit of a tangent, but like it kind of just goes to my point of that. Like, I just think historically Stone Temple Pilots, for some reason, at some point in history and of their timeline, like it was decided that this is a band that's going to be shit on, and it's more of a universal thing. Maybe
like Smashing Pumpkins was like that too. They were a band they decided.
Right, you get some mixed reviews. Like Led Zeppelin was that, well, at least with Rolling Stone, right? I mean, but there's certain bands that's like, I'm not going to, drawing a line in the sand, and I'm not going to cross it. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I think that I do like this album quite a bit. I think it's interesting. I think it takes you in different directions. I think it's got some really cool, great rock riffs, great guitar riffs on this, great guitar solos. I think it takes you to a little bit of a psychedelic arena where they're kind of, maybe doing a little bit more exploration in the studio. They'll do something that's a little bit more, kind of acoustic, or, just different. Art School Girl is an interesting song because it kind of does everything in one song, and it kind of fits somehow. Yeah. And so they're taking chances, or doing different things, and some of the stuff sounds really great. I don't think it hits the highs quite like Purple does. I still think Purple's probably my favorite. But I think that this to me, this still stands up. I was definitely into this record this week. A lot of those songs that I mentioned already. Tumble in the Rough's a cool song as well. But I think in particular, like Lady Picture Show, that might be up there in my top 5 of Stone Temple Pilot songs, period. And so yeah, I don't know. I never got the backlash against Stone Temple Pilots. And I think that they're, at least for these 3 albums, I didn't really keep listening to them beyond this record, but I think that they got a really solid first 3 records. I will defend them to anybody. And I don't, maybe this is a little, I don't know where this falls, either above or behind Core. Maybe behind it, but maybe just by a little bit. But I still really like it. I like that they're branching out and trying different things, and I certainly connected with it this week.
Let me go back. I did not love Core as an album, so just to go on the record for that, I definitely thought it was fine, but grunge middle lane, right? You know what I mean? It was there for me, right? But I would not consider that to be like a truly great album. It was a average album for me. I really love Purple because of the scope of the ambition, where it was almost like I can remember listening at the time, being shocked, right? Like that they had these other layers, because it was sort of like they took that jump, right, from like, were they going to be Candlebox or were they something else? And it was like, whoa, they're definitely a step above what Candlebox is. And nothing against Candlebox. I love You and Far Behind, but I think you guys get what I'm saying, right? You know what I mean? It's like they have another layer. This one I love. And it's funny. Usually Josh and I are on the same page on a lot of stuff, but we are not seeing it the same way this week. I love the production of this album. I was like, the 70s is back. 70s production. I love it. Like, it's getting cleaner and cleaner every week. And it's like, I didn't think this cleanness happened as early as it did, right? As we were getting in the 90s right now. And it was such a nice, refreshing thing to go back to like 70s style production, where it's just stripped down and it isn't just about the cleanness of it. It's a little dirtier, right? Which I very much welcome. I don't want it all the time, and I can appreciate clean production, but I do like a world where there's like a grittier production here. And I do like the fact that you have to search for some of the things in this album. The big brightness of the classic rock guitars, which are always in Stone Temple Pilots albums. As Matt said, the guitar lines and the bass parts in this album are standouts. Even having listened to this album many times, I'm like, God damn, the DeLeos are pretty damn good guitar players, man. Like I sometimes forget it, like how many good guitar lines there are in Stone Temple Pilots songs. Like when you go back and listen to it, very memorable ones. And they also have a way around a hook, the Stone Temple Pilots, which is not always easy with the type of music they make. But as Matt mentioned, there's a lot of glam. There's a little bit of shoegaze in here at different times. They don't stay in it very long, but sort of the distortion that's there. There's a song like Big Bang Baby. I know the Jumpin' Jack Flash is there, but in many ways it sounds more like a Stooges song than it sounds like a Rolling Stones song, I would say. It's got that really grimy, like fuzzy guitar riff there and it sounds like it was recorded in the padded studio, right, that the Stooges recorded their album in famously.
And it's got a weirder drum beat too, right? It's kind of like an off-kilter drum beat that's not as traditional. Maybe the Stones wouldn't have done something like that. That's probably true.
Yeah, and I love the chord changes in that song too, like how there's three distinct parts of that song. It's almost like walking into three rooms. Lady Picture Show is a little bit more of a traditional rock song. I agree, Matt, it's a very good song. Do I like it as much as Big Bang Baby and Trippin' on a Hole in a Paper Heart? Not as much, but I liked all three of those singles, so I was there from the beginning. Art School Girl is like such a Scott Weiland song. It's got like Scott Weiland energy just dripping from it, you know what I mean? And that romantic element to Scott Weiland, but also it's like a doomed romance, because a lot of what Scott Weiland has is both like romance and tragedy, kind of is like his vibe, I would say. Stone Temple Pilots, I remember lots of women I knew were really drawn to Stone Temple Pilots because they do have sort of like a sexy vibe to them as well. And I think probably you guys said you don't know as much. Do you know the song Sour Girl? That was from the fourth album. That was a pretty big hit.
I remember that single,
yeah, stuff like that. So there's all kinds of good stuff on that album too. But from start to finish, I enjoyed this album. I also love the fact that it wasn't overly long. It's 42 minutes. So it's the perfect length. And it just comes in hot at press play. And it ends great with 7 Caged Tigers. And so 12 songs. It's a lean album. It can kick ass if you need it to rock at times. It can be psychedelic if you want to just kind of sit and vibe on it a little bit. It's got great choruses across the board. And for my money, this is the best Stone Temple Pilots album. I really do. This is the one I revisit the most. And the one that I also think this album has a timeless quality to it. Sometimes when you listen to Purple, and certainly Core, you're like, I am in the 1990s. That's not a bad thing, but you realize it. This album, it has a much more expansive idea of time and place. And I'm coming to realize that as much as I like certain albums, being able to place them outside the decade they're in is something that like takes an album up a step for me. And this has a 60s, a 70s, and a 90s feel in its own way. And I like that about it. It's malleable. So strong thumbs up for you're gonna hear me say that a lot this week. Strong thumbs up for me on this one.
Yeah,
So.
and I would agree. That's a harder thing to do, right? Because it can be really easy to get caught up in the trappings of like what's in vogue right now, right?
Sure.
What are the production tricks that people are doing right now? And I don't know if they ever did it more than they did in the '80s. With the synth, like
Right.
it's like you start playing a chord on a keyboard. It's like as soon as you hear that, it's like that's the '80s, right? It's like so
God,
defined.
the '70s. That AOR sound is also like
there's that too. Yes, they all
immediately
kind of
know
have.
it's the '70s.
Yeah, they all have in some way, I guess, their defining qualities. But to be able to have a record that kind of maybe it could come out whenever, there's something extra special about that. So I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It shows that they're more skilled craftsmen too, because by this point you know that they've released 3 very different albums. I agree with you, Matt, that this is to some degree an extension of what they did in Purple, but Purple also had connective tissue to Core. This one does not share much in common with Core at all. They clearly, you know what I mean? You almost wouldn't.
Yeah, they branched out further, but
band.
it's an extension of what they started doing with Purple and then expanding their sound. And this
but like if
expands it
you
further.
listen to Core and then you listen to this album, you could easily not realize that it's the same band. Because, for example, like Plush and Creep sound very little like Big Bang Baby and a Trippin' on a Hole in a Paper Heart, right?
Yep.
Even how Scott Weiland sings,
Yes.
you wouldn't even think necessarily it's there.
And I think that's what threw me this week too, like not knowing this album, like, and liking those 2 albums a lot. I think that's kind of what I think. I'm more positive on this album than negative ultimately, but like that's why I'm also in the middle, is because like I just haven't digested that they were so intentionally going for something different, and I still don't know how I feel about Scott Weiland's voice. So that's why, like, I hear what you're saying about your review, in your review and in your strong feelings about that, but I'm just not like there on this album yet. So anyway.